Are you still calling Marty St. Louis a Peewee coach? Is that the hill that Habs Nation is going to die on? Is that the fallback for everybody who was not happy with the end of the season? Because you take a look, he's not a Peewee coach anymore. He's a Jack Adams finalist. Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of Montreal Hockey Talk. And the big news around the National Hockey League is Jack Adams finalist Marty St. Louis being nominated. And now congratulations to Spencer Carberry and Scott Arniel, respectively from the Capitals and the Jets, on their nominations as well. But this is a big deal in the hockey world, especially when it comes to Montreal. Because who thought that at the beginning of the season Marty St. Louis would get nominated? We knew he was developing as a coach. We knew his staff was developing. And you know he's a good coach when in interviews he sits down and he says, oh, well, you know, this isn't about me. It's a team award. And he's not wrong. It doesn't only belong to him or his coaching staff or management. It belongs to the players on the ice. It's a reflection of what they were able to do during the season to get where they ended up. They wanted to be in the mix. They ended up in the playoffs. So they overachieved a little bit this season. Granted, we didn't get the result that we wanted. They got eliminated in the first round, but you know, a couple of bounces here and there, and it could have been a much different series and a little bit better officiating too, but we'll keep that amongst ourselves. Okay, but at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself the question, does Marty deserve to be a Jack Adams finalist? Well, I can tell you a few years back, Marty and I ran into each other at one of my D-skate camps that I ran with former Montreal Hockey Talk pregame host Stephen Hindle. And, you know, it was just in a bar in the hotel, and we were downstairs having drinks, and I went up to him, we introduced each other, took a couple of pictures, and we talked a little bit of hockey. Marty is a former Hawkesbury Hawk. I used to work for the Hawkesbury Hawks at the time, so we had a little bit in common, and we began to discuss things, right? The state of junior hockey, and so on and so forth. He talked to me about how he saw the game and how he saw developing players, even at his son's level. And the ideas that he had then certainly do translate to what he's doing right now, in the sense that, you know, in Peewee, you're not necessarily teaching tactics to your players. You're teaching them skills. You're teaching them better skating skills. You're teaching them, elusiveness. You're teaching them to think on their own, to be able to read and react to certain plays. You're not teaching them systems. You're not teaching them a power play. You're not teaching them penalty killing. You're letting their natural ability dictate that. You give them a couple of structured breakouts, and after that, you let nature take its course. And, you know, even today, I see that, you know, working with the junior teams that I work with, I see that from them as well, which makes it very, very interesting. But he's evolved, and he's not that Peewee coach anymore. And he's just taking over the Montreal Canadiens. He's made his mark in the league. Not just in the fact that he's a capable coach, but in the fact that he's got a different outlook on the game. He looks at the game much differently in the sense that he's more a concept-based coach than he is a rigid systems coach. And what does that mean? The idea of a concept is to tell somebody that, like, you know, you see the game this way. Just an idea. You don't tell them what side of the ice to come in on. You don't tell them whether to dump the puck in or whether to carry it in. You just tell them how you envision things. And you allow the player on his own to worry about how that's going to get done. And that's what you call individualized development. In the sense that every time you say one thing to every player on your team, they interpret it differently. There's not a single player that thinks the exact same thing. And that diversity creates individualism, and it creates different trains of thought, which could augment your team's ability to play. I mean, understanding each player's unique skill set is a gift that Marty St. Louis has. You know, it's kind of like the cornerstone of his coaching, as opposed to like the one-size-fits-all concept that most coaches use. You know, when you look at it, it's a very personalized approach. That doesn't mean that he's lenient on people. It just means that it keeps them accountable and that he holds them to a different set of standards than a rigid coach would. A rigid coach will tell you, okay, when the puck gets dumped over to the opposite side, I want you on the hash mark in the slot. That's rigid. That doesn't allow the player to think on his own. Whereas Marty will say, when the puck is dumped into the corner, I want F1 to go in and forecheck, F2 to be there and support, and F3, find a spot on the ice that's open. Whoa, there's a different train of thought. Let me think differently. Let me find a spot on the ice where I think I may get a pass from the guy when he picks up the puck in the corner. Or if it goes to the support guy, let me make sure I'm in a spot where I'm supporting both of them. That's not Marty telling him where to be. That's Marty telling them where they should be and where they think they ought to be. And they pick the spot. So it's not rigid. It's individualized. And, whether it's refining their technical skills or building their confidence or just learning to adjust to different types of play, the players adapt to that much more quickly than if it's A, B, and C, right? And you look at players like Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki and some of the other talented players on the team. A guy like Lane Hudson benefits tremendously from this type of thought because he doesn't have to be in a specific spot. On D, they're told to play man-to-man. Not how to play man-to-man. They're told to play man-to-man. So you pick a guy and you stay with him. That's individualized. That's allowing the player to learn his strengths and weaknesses on his own so he can adapt to it. And that makes for better coaching. It also empowers the player and it leaves them accountable. It's not about, if Yuri Slafkovsky makes a cross-ice pass that's crappy, Yuri Slafkovsky knows he's made a crappy pass, and that empowers him. He comes back to the bench and he grabs the tablet and he looks and it's like, oh shit, I screwed up. Right? Okay. This is what I'm going to do different next time, coach. Accountability. It allows him to correct himself and to be better at what he does. And it favors development over immediate success. Rigid teams, right, what they do, or teams with rigid systems, what they do is they focus more on the ABCs and the 2 points at every single turn. When you're a team like Montreal, who has been in the toilet for the last few years since they got to the Stanley Cup final in 2021, in fact, well, then you look at it a little bit differently. Now you look at it as like we need to get better day after day after day after day. Rigid systems don't allow you to do that. Allowing players to develop on their own and individualize their style of play, that definitely allows for a different atmosphere and allows for development and improvement very quickly. And it also allows for a much better environment. How many times have you gone to work where you know exactly what the plan is for the day and you're stressed out because you have a rigid deadline? Well, name me what rigid deadline Marty St. Louis has given to his players. He hasn't told them I want this many points this season. He hasn't told them I want to make the playoffs. He's told them, guys, we're going to try to make the playoffs. Guys, I want you to play meaningful games in March and April. I want you to be in the mix. Let's try to get there. It wasn't him. The players did the work. He just led the way. And there's a huge impact on player development when it comes to allowing them to do all this on their own. You're delegating. You're literally delegating the player's improvement to the player. You're looking at, Trevor Letowski and you're looking at Stefan Robida. And to a certain extent, all they do is they give their ideas to the players as far as where they should cover, what they should do, etc. They go through drills, movements that are going to be conducive to individualized thought. Go to a practice. You'll see what I mean. This is what I want you to do, but you don't have to do it exactly this way. The end result is this. And that's what they do. They work on getting to the end result. It's not about how you get there. It's that you actually do get there. And that's the difference between the way Marty St. Louis coaches as opposed to some of the older school guys. And it's refreshing. And it shows you just how much the game has changed. Because with the speed of the game, you can't play rigid systems anymore. Teams adapt, right? And so because they adapt, they tend to be a little different. They tend to be a little, attack differently, come from different vectors, and it allows your team, because they're able to read and react to the play on their own, as opposed to the way the coach wants, it makes them better for it and able to defend and counterattack and get into the offensive zone and create offense. So stop calling him that Peewee coach, because he's not. He's a hell of a lot better than that. And every accolade that he's getting, as far as the Jack Adams is concerned, is merited. Now, ask yourself what makes Marty different. And when I look at it, I turn around and I decided, and I wrote this down, so you'll have to bear with me as I look at my notes. I drew a comparison between Marty's style of coaching and the most rigid coach in the history of the National Hockey League, Jacques Lemaire. And trust me, I used to work for Benoit Pouliot's mom. I've heard stories. Well, let me just tell you, they weren't very good. I'm not going to go into detail, but, for respect of what was told. But when you've got an offensive player playing for a rigid defensive-minded coach, that doesn't mesh. We've seen that in Montreal, and it didn't make Ben very happy. And there you go. That's where the relationship went, down the toilet. But anyway, if you take a look at the key elements, as I said, Marty's style allows freedom, creativity, and individual decision making, whereas the decisions are taken out of the way by Jacques Lemaire's rigid trap style system. Okay, so look at the key elements of Marty's system. You've got concepts over systems. You've got player empowerment, adapting to the modern NHL, which I talked about. Being able to read and react to plays on their own, and individualized development, where you're not putting everybody in the same box. Everybody's in their own little box, and they're learning the game their own way. When you look at Jacques Lemaire's rigid system, the key elements of that is that it's always defense first. And there is part of the problem when it comes to rigid systems. Rigid systems are built around teams that don't really think they have the offense to be able to compete, so they try to stifle the opposition. And it becomes boring New Jersey Devils or Minnesota Wild hockey. It worked well with the red line in, but now with the red line out and the game more wide open, it's not quite as easily adaptable as it was before. Take the two-line pass out and, the trap works. Put the two-line pass and take it out completely. And the trap, you have difficulty maintaining that, right? Just as an example. Every player had a specific role in Jacques Lemaire's system, right? You had to be either a really strong defensive player on the third and fourth line, or you had to be a very good 200-foot player on the first and second line. In some cases, it worked. In some cases, it didn't. He had success. He won his Stanley Cups, but that didn't mean that everybody enjoyed playing the game. And that's a really important part of Marty St. Louis' style of coaching. Guys need to enjoy playing, and they need to enjoy playing with each other. Rigid systems don't give any freedom to players, or extremely little freedom to players. If you leave your position to make a play, and then you go to the bench and the coach looks at you and says, "Why did you do that? You should have let so-and-so go get the puck." That's what I want him to do. As the player that made the good play and got the puck out, as an example, what do you do at that point? You bury your head in your sand and you're like, crap. I can't get anything right. No, you did do something right. You got the puck out. You did your job. Okay, just because you didn't do it the way the coach drew it up doesn't mean that it's wrong. Maybe the coach is wrong. That's why rigid systems, I never liked implementing them. Personally, as a coach, right, I coach Peewee as well, right? When I was coaching Peewee AA, the first day I walked in, I was there to evaluate the team. It was, I think, 20 players that were on my bench, okay? 2 goalies, 12 forwards, 6 defensemen. And I walked into the locker room. I said, "Guys, I can't really give you any instructions today, but there's one rule I'm going to give you. Don't dump the puck into the zone." And they looked at me funny. I said, I'm not kidding. Win or lose, it's an exhibition game. I don't want you to dump the puck in. We won the game 9-2. On their own, they decided to regroup in the neutral zone and attack again. I didn't have to tell them anything. And the assistant coaches were looking at me like I did something magical. I didn't. I gave them a rule. I said, "This is what I don't want. Don't dump it in." Simple. 9-2 win. And that just goes to show you, when you empower your players and you let them think individually as opposed to playing rigid systems, you tend to get better results, and you tend to let them grow as players. And the one thing, too, is they rely too much on the system afterwards, right? So when something goes wrong, they don't know what to do. They sit there and they're like, "Oh, shit, what do I do? What if I do this, the coach will get mad." And there's too much thought involved. The game's too fast. You can't think about what does coach want me to do versus what does my instinct tell you. Your instinct is normally right, no matter what you're doing on the ice. 99% of the time, you're going to be right. That 1% of the time where you're not, shit happens. So let your instincts dictate the way you play. That's what Marty St. Louis lets his players do. And whether they're right or wrong, and they're wrong most of the time right now because they're young and they're still learning the game at the NHL level, they'll learn from those mistakes. That's what he's counting on, and we've already seen that. Lane Hudson started off the season with a lot of mistakes. Before the Four Nations, he was minus 15. After the Four Nations, though, he mitigated those mistakes and finished the season at a minus 2. That's a hell of a change for a guy in his rookie season. So it works. So let's look at it as a whole, right? Flexibility versus structure. Okay? What would you prefer? Being rigid as a player or even in life? Would you rather be in that big brother scenario where you go to work, you come home, you eat dinner, you sleep, You go back to work the next day. Or would you rather be the guy that comes home and says, hey, what are we doing tonight? What's on the day? You making dinner? Are we going out? What's going on? You want that variety. It keeps life spicy. And so as a hockey player, you're playing 82 games a year. At a certain period of time, if there's not variety in those 82 games, the game gets mundane and you get bored. And you tend to make mistakes when you get bored because you lack focus at that point. So flexibility allows you to continue thinking, keeps things fresh, and keeps you on your toes. Very important. And then there's creativity over predictability, right? The puck's going in the corner. Where are you going? Well, I have to go and post up at the hash mark because coach told me to. Or would you rather be like, well, if Cole goes into the corner to go get the puck, I'm going to come in behind him. And when I come in behind him, Slav's going to go in an open area between the two of us. Right, Slav? Yeah. Well, what happens if the puck goes back the other way? Then I'm going to go and go get it, and you guys figure it out on your own. And who's going to cover what and who's going to come in support? Individualized thought, reading the play. Who's going to get there first? Where can I pass the puck? Let me turn and see what my options are. Instead of, oh, this is where you have to be. If you're not there, it doesn't work. So all these different things, I can go on forever. All these different things make Marty a better coach. That's the big difference. So when you take him and you compare him like I did to Lemaire or some of the other more rigid coaches, we had one here in Montreal forever. Uncle Jacques Martin. And yeah, and granted in 2010, we defensed other teams to death to get to the conference final. At the end of the day, we ran out of steam because there's only so much defending you can do before you can't do it anymore and you're fatigued. You take a look at the Montreal Canadiens in the 2021 playoffs. It wasn't a question of them playing a very defensive, offensive-oriented style. They were defending. They had solid goaltending. They managed to score goals. They got lucky in overtime, and they got to the Stanley Cup final. Once they got to the final, they were out of gas. Players like Toffoli were injured. Shea Weber could barely skate. Carey Price was playing in net in one knee. That comes from wear and tear of being overtaxed by playing rigid hockey, right? And that was Dom Ducharme, who was in his second season in the NHL. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say here is that old school coaches, and I'm glad now when you look at guys like Spencer Carberry and you look at newer coaches like Scott Arniel, their thought process is different. It's not that same old that we see all the time. And that's what gives the game flavor. That's what makes it exciting. That's why you're going to get a 4-2 empty net goal victory at one point, and then those same two teams can have an 8-1 game because things change. Things become different. You have different guys in the lineup. You have different guys that score. You have goaltenders that don't play as well, and you have defensemen that don't follow the game as well. They have bad nights. You take advantage of those bad nights. It's not all about being here. And that's what makes Marty St. Louis a Jack Adams Trophy candidate, is the fact that he's been able to take the game that he so loves, take what he learned from John Tortorella, and adapt that to the way he's coaching his team right now. John Tortorella can sit back and, he can be like, you know what? I'm happy for him because I taught him this. I let him be this as a player. And basically what Marty St. Louis has done is he's taken his success as a player and what his coach allowed him to do, and he's put it on a platter for his players saying, guys, this is what I want from you. This is what I expect. This is the end goal for us. How are we going to get there? And he listens to everybody, and he adapts to everybody, and he learns as much from his own players as they learn from him. And you can't ask for anything more than that. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the new graphics. I mean, you can tell the square is a little different, right? I've got my little notes on the side as opposed to the bottom like I did before. And, there's going to be new things coming along as well. I'm incorporating a whiteboard, guys, where I'm going to be able to show you guys specific plays that you ask me about. I'll talk about the power play. I'll talk about variations of the power play because obviously over the summer, what are we going to talk about? The Stanley Cup playoffs are still going on. The draft lottery is coming up on Monday, right? So we're going to talk about that. But overall, we got to talk about other things. You know, we're going to assess the defense. We're going to assess the forwards. We're going to look at the goaltending. We're going to talk about what the Canadiens should do in free agency, what they should do at the draft. And I'm going to try to get a couple of guests in as well so that I'm not the only one talking. All that and more. You know, I did wait a little bit of time before I got it going, but I'm getting it going. So, guys, thank you. Go Habs, go.